Sophia Lane looked up from the tray she was balancing, her green eyes calm as a voice behind her cut through the restaurant like a whip. "Are you actually going to serve me properly, or is this a joke?" Alexander Reed, the billionaire CEO, stood at the center of the VIP section, sharp suit tailored perfectly to his athletic frame, wristwatch glinting under the chandelier light, his tone dripping with impatience and disbelief. The words ricocheted in Sophia's mind for only a fraction of a second before she composed herself, straightening the silverware and aligning the glasses with precise care, each movement deliberate, measured, as if the room had slowed just for her. She didn't reply verbally. Her actions spoke louder than any words could, her quiet confidence an invisible shield against his sharp gaze. Alexander stepped closer, scanning her movements like a predator calculating the odds, the smirk on his face faltering as he noticed the small corrections she made to the napkin folds, the subtle adjustments to the spacing of plates on the table, details that only someone with meticulous training would recognize. "I asked you a question," he snapped, voice cutting through the chatter, but Sophia only lifted her eyes momentarily, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips before she moved to a side station and tapped on the tablet lying there, bringing up live orders and guest preferences, her fingers flying with expert precision, orchestrating a silent dance that controlled the flow of the entire dining room. Whispers rippled among the servers who watched, some noticing the unexpected command she wielded over the space without raising her voice. Alexander blinked, disbelief tightening around his features, the power he had always relied upon slipping through his fingers in a way that made his jaw tense. Sophia adjusted the placement of a wine glass for the third time, then stepped toward his table, offering the drink with perfect posture, her movements fluid, unassuming, yet undeniably commanding attention. Alexander hesitated, the corners of his mouth twitching as he realized she had anticipated his exact preference without a single word from him. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sophia had already returned to the center of her section, her eyes scanning the room with quiet authority, catching a staff member's mistake before it could happen, rerouting an order that could have caused chaos, and all the while maintaining a serene smile, calm as a still lake. Alexander leaned back slightly, tension coiling in his shoulders as he studied her, trying to reconcile the contradiction. The woman in front of him appeared ordinary, yet every action she took suggested mastery, confidence, and a level of control he had never expected from someone in her position. The murmurs from nearby guests seemed distant now, background noise as he focused solely on her, noticing how she interacted with the other diners, how she anticipated needs, corrected minor errors before they escalated, and guided the room with invisible precision. The smirk he had started with faded into a tight line as he processed the quiet power radiating from her, the subtle cues that indicated she had been operating with a level of authority and knowledge that surpassed his assumptions. Sophia glanced briefly at him, a measured, polite tilt of her head acknowledging his presence without inviting confrontation, and returned to arranging a tray of desserts, each placement deliberate, each gesture echoing a silent message of competence. Alexander's chest tightened, the realization settling over him like a sudden chill. He had underestimated her, dismissed her because of her position, her uniform, her quiet demeanor, and yet here she was, controlling the flow, anticipating every move, and commanding respect without a single raised voice. The weight of the lesson hung between them, unspoken, palpable, a quiet storm in the midst of the bustling restaurant. As Sophia moved away toward another table, adjusting silverware and placing drinks, Alexander's eyes followed, a mix of astonishment, intrigue, and reluctant admiration crossing his features. He had walked in confident, ready to assert dominance, yet found himself silently studying her, captivated, unsettled, and aware that this encounter had only just begun, that the true story behind Sophia Lane was far deeper than he could have imagined, and that the quietest person in the room often held the most power. Sophia Lane moved through the dining room with the same quiet confidence, her eyes scanning every table, every detail, every subtle movement of the staff and guests, ensuring that nothing was out of place, that each order arrived perfectly timed, each glass refilled without a moment of delay, and yet, Her calm exterior hid the precision and awareness that made her indispensable without anyone realizing it. Alexander Reed remained seated, his hand resting lightly on the polished table, eyes following her every move. The disbelief in his expression deepening as he watched her guide the rhythm of the restaurant without uttering more than a few polite words, each interaction leaving guests impressed, unaware that they were witnessing a subtle display of control that would have taken him years to master. Sophia stopped briefly at a corner table where a minor error had gone unnoticed, a fork slightly askew, a glass off-center, and with a simple adjustment, she restored balance to the setting, her green eyes meeting Alexander's for a fleeting second, conveying competence, authority, and a quiet reminder that she was the one steering the room. The energy of the restaurant shifted imperceptibly, the staff unconsciously adapting to her pace, her timing, and even the most impatient guest was absorbed by the seamless service, the gentle efficiency of a woman who had learned to command respect without raising her voice, without demanding attention, and Alexander realized that every move he had anticipated, every assumption he had made about her abilities, had been surpassed without any effort on her part beyond the execution of her role. With mastery, he observed the way she handled a request for a complex dietary adjustment from a high-profile guest, her fingers flying over the tablet as she coordinated the kitchen, staff, and timing to ensure the dish arrived perfectly, and all without a single glance or word beyond a soft confirmation, leaving Alexander's mind racing to comprehend the depth of skill and control displayed in what had seemed like a simple act of serving. Sophia then returned to the center of her section, pausing just long enough to acknowledge a new order arriving from the hostess, her eyes flicking to the screen as she rerouted the request seamlessly, then continuing to walk among the tables with deliberate steps, a rhythm that seemed to synchronize the staff and flow of service as if she were the conductor of an orchestra, invisible to all but the keenest observer, Alexander included. The tension built subtly as he watched, an unfamiliar sensation for someone so accustomed to dictating and controlling, the realization dawning that the quietest person in the room was the one shaping the experience, the one holding influence over the flow, the outcomes, and the perception of everyone present. His hand traced the edge of the glass in front of him, the cool surface grounding him as he processed the dissonance between his expectations and the reality unfolding, every instinct telling him that he was witnessing something remarkable, extraordinary in its simplicity, yet profoundly powerful in execution. Sophia approached another table with the same composed demeanor, her touch light but precise, her movements economical but full of intention, and Alexander noted how she managed to command attention, respect, and efficiency without ever raising her voice, a skill that contrasted sharply with his world where power was declared loudly, forcefully, often clumsily, and yet, here it was embodied in a single person moving silently among the diners. A brief exchange of a glance with a server, a subtle gesture, and a minor miscommunication was corrected instantly, the flow restored, unnoticed by the guests but not by Alexander, whose admiration grew alongside a reluctant recognition of his own misjudgment. As Sophia moved past him, placing a final glass on a carefully set table, the quiet authority in her posture, the understated confidence in her stride, and the mastery in her hands left him momentarily speechless, a mixture of respect, intrigue, and the subtle sting of humility settling over him, and he realized with a slow clarity that the person he had underestimated, the one he thought he could control or impress, had been quietly, effortlessly, shaping the environment, the perception, and the outcomes in ways he could neither command nor predict, leaving the encounter open-ended, the story far from finished, and a sense of anticipation that this meeting was only the beginning of understanding the depth of Sophia Lane. Sophia Lane paused briefly near the back station, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the counter as she scanned the room, noting which tables were nearing completion, which orders were delayed, and which guests needed attention, every detail filed away with meticulous care. Alexander Reed remained seated, his fingers drumming lightly against the polished wood of the table, eyes fixed on her as though watching someone perform a carefully choreographed routine, realizing that each movement was intentional, calculated, yet seemingly effortless. A guest called for a wine recommendation, and Sophia approached with her usual calm, explaining the pairing with precision, answering questions about flavor profiles and vintages with a knowledge that suggested training and expertise far beyond her position, and the guest nodded, impressed, while Alexander's eyes widened, the edge of disbelief sharpening as he processed her competence. She moved past him again, taking a note from a nearby server and immediately reorganizing the sequence of plates in the kitchen to prevent any delay, her timing flawless, and he leaned forward, curiosity and a reluctant admiration building, recognizing that her quiet demeanor had masked a formidable skill set, a level of control over the flow and order of events that he had not anticipated and had underestimated entirely. The murmurs of the staff faded into the background as Alexander focused solely on her. The way she adjusted a chair for a child at a table, corrected the alignment of silverware for an older couple, and offered a subtle nod to a server who had been momentarily uncertain, all without raising her voice, all without a hint of stress, yet conveying authority in the simplest, most unassuming ways. Sophia's green eyes flicked briefly toward him, acknowledging his presence with a polite tilt of the head, a gesture so minimal, yet commanding, and she continued through the dining room with a grace and rhythm that dictated the pace, the energy, and the perception of everyone around her, leaving Alexander momentarily speechless as he tried to reconcile the quiet authority she projected with the assumptions he had carried about her abilities. At a corner table, a guest requested a complex modification to their dish, and Sophia swiftly coordinated with the kitchen, timing, and staff with subtle gestures and precise words, ensuring that the adjustment was made perfectly, and Alexander watched, astonished, as she managed the entire process without a single misstep, the control she wielded invisible but undeniable. A soft laugh from a child at another table drew her attention, and she knelt slightly, adjusting a glass without interrupting the conversation, her movements efficient yet gentle, demonstrating empathy and awareness alongside her competence, and Alexander realized that he had never seen such a combination of technical skill, awareness, and emotional intelligence embodied in a single person in a service role. The realization hit him fully then. Sophia Lane was orchestrating the environment, guiding outcomes, and influencing perceptions without anyone noticing, and he had been completely unprepared to recognize or contend with the power she had quietly accumulated through knowledge, poise, and strategic awareness. As she passed by his table to deliver a dessert, he caught a hint of a small, enigmatic smile, fleeting and controlled, and the weight of understanding settled on him, that the quietest person in the room often held the greatest influence, and that the assumptions he had made based on appearances, on position, and on expectation had led him to underestimate her completely. He exhaled slowly, the pulse of realization quickening in his chest, and he knew that this encounter was only the beginning, that the story unfolding in the dining room was far deeper than he could yet comprehend, and that Sophia Lane, with her quiet authority and unassuming confidence, had begun to rewrite the rules of engagement in this space, leaving him simultaneously intrigued, unsettled, and aware that the next move, the next interaction, would reveal even more about the depth of her influence and the true measure of her control over the room, the staff, and perhaps over his perception of power itself. Sophia Lane adjusted the last plate on a nearby table, her movements precise and deliberate, then glanced toward Alexander Reed, who had risen slightly from his seat, leaning on the edge of the marble table with an expression of cautious fascination. The restaurant hummed softly around them, the clinking of silverware and muted conversations creating a background that contrasted sharply with the intensity of his gaze. Sophia moved toward the dessert station, balancing a tray of meticulously arranged pastries, each one placed with perfect alignment, and Alexander watched as if she were conducting an invisible orchestra, her influence spreading beyond the items she carried, shaping the environment with a subtle authority that made every movement of the staff seem synchronized to her timing. She handed a dessert to a guest with a polite nod and soft smile, then quickly corrected a minor error in an order that had gone unnoticed, rerouting a plate back to the kitchen before it could reach the wrong table. Alexander blinked, noting the efficiency, the calm in her actions, and the way she commanded respect without raising her voice or drawing attention to herself. His eyes tracked her movements across the room, every small gesture revealing a depth of skill and awareness that contradicted the assumption he had made about her, a quiet power that left him both unsettled and intrigued. Sophia paused briefly to check the status of a complex order on her tablet, then turned, her green eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment, a spark of unspoken understanding passing between them. He straightened slightly in his chair, a subtle shift betraying his attempt to regain composure. Yet he remained captivated, aware that the woman before him was far more than a mere server. As Sophia moved back toward the center of her section, she adjusted the positioning of chairs for a family seated nearby, smiled at a child with gentle encouragement, and ensured that each staff member was moving in harmony with the rhythm she established, the room itself responding to her direction in a way that Alexander could not manipulate, no matter his wealth or influence. The realization that she had been quietly orchestrating the flow of the restaurant, guiding outcomes without anyone noticing, pressed upon him like a soft but insistent weight, a recognition that authority and mastery were not always loud, and that the most significant influence often came from those who moved silently yet deliberately. Sophia approached a table near the window and knelt slightly to adjust a napkin for a guest, her attention to detail seamless, her calm demeanor conveying competence without arrogance. Alexander watched, fascinated by the combination of efficiency, awareness, and empathy in her actions, noting that her presence altered the dynamic of the room, subtly shifting perceptions and influencing behavior without a single raised voice. He took a slow breath, trying to process the paradox of her quiet strength, the way she managed every element of the dining experience with such poise, and the understated authority that radiated from her with each movement. Sophia glanced back at him briefly, acknowledging his attention with a controlled, polite tilt of the head, then continued on her path, the flow of service uninterrupted, seamless, and precise. The longer he observed, the more he understood that he had misjudged her, that his assumptions based on position and uniform had blinded him to the depth of her abilities, and that she held a level of control and influence that he could neither contest nor fully comprehend in the moment. As Sophia passed a final table and adjusted the setting of glasses and utensils with meticulous care, Alexander felt a surge of respect and the faint sting of humility, the knowledge settling in that this encounter was far from ordinary, and that the story of her quiet mastery was only beginning to unfold, leaving him with an anticipation of what further revelation her composed and skillful presence might bring. Sophia Lane moved to the center of the dining room once again, her posture calm, measured, each step deliberate as she observed the flow of activity around her, her mind tracking orders, guest needs, and staff movement with precision that made the environment seem effortlessly coordinated. Alexander Reed remained seated, leaning slightly forward, his elbows resting on the polished wood, eyes following her, the disbelief in his expression slowly transforming into a mixture of admiration and cautious curiosity as he realized that her quiet movements dictated the rhythm of the entire room. A waiter hesitated near a crowded table, unsure of how to manage a complex request, and Sophia stepped forward with a subtle gesture, guiding the server with a single nod, a whisper of direction, and a glance, instantly restoring confidence and correcting the sequence of actions without any overt command, leaving Alexander momentarily stunned at how easily she controlled the environment without drawing attention to herself. She paused near a table of business clients, adjusting the placement of silverware, noting the position of the glasses, and making a minor change to a chair so that the seating was balanced, all with small, almost imperceptible movements that nevertheless altered the entire presentation, and Alexander's eyes widened as he realized that she had been orchestrating every detail, not just the obvious elements, but the subtle, unseen aspects of the dining experience that shaped perception and maintained order. Sophia's green eyes met his for a fraction of a second, a calm, knowing expression that conveyed awareness of his observation without acknowledging it directly. Then she returned to the dessert station, checking the status of pending orders on her tablet with a light touch and a fluid movement, her fingers precise and confident, correcting timing and sequence to ensure the kitchen output remained synchronized with the dining room's pace. Alexander leaned back slightly, letting a slow breath escape, as he considered the paradox of her quiet authority The way she commanded respect through action rather than words, efficiency rather than ego, her influence felt by everyone without anyone noticing the scope or depth of her control. Guests at another table were momentarily distracted by a minor discrepancy in their order, and Sophia moved swiftly, placing a hand lightly on the edge of the tray, redirecting the plates and confirming details with the kitchen, all without raising her voice, and the guests responded with polite smiles, unaware that the entire sequence had been subtly guided, and Alexander recognized the precision and foresight involved, the expertise she wielded invisibly. She adjusted a high-back chair for an elderly guest with a gentle touch, crouched slightly to meet the guest's eye, and offered a soft smile, conveying attentiveness and professionalism. And Alexander noted the combination of grace, intelligence, and unassuming authority that made her presence commanding without dominance, influential without spectacle. Sophia returned to the main service aisle, a tray balanced with multiple items, her movements efficient and measured, eyes scanning the room to anticipate needs before they arose, and Alexander watched, his pulse quickening slightly as he understood that she had mastered not just service, but the management of perception, timing, and outcomes, an invisible influence that he could neither match nor interrupt. A subtle shift in a server's stance, a minor adjustment of a napkin, a quick confirmation of a dietary preference, all coordinated seamlessly by her, and Alexander felt the full weight of realization that the woman he had underestimated was quietly in command of the space, the staff, and the unfolding experience, every detail filtered through her judgment and awareness, leaving him observing, silent, and intrigued. Sophia paused briefly to take a drink of water, eyes flicking over the dining room with a practiced awareness, noting the flow and energy, then moved to the front entrance as a new guest arrived, her approach calm and assured, and Alexander followed her with his gaze, captivated by the subtle mastery, the unspoken power of competence and poise, the quiet confidence that redefined his understanding of influence. Each movement she made, each decision executed without fanfare, each gentle correction or anticipatory adjustment left Alexander increasingly aware that the person he had dismissed as ordinary had, in fact, been orchestrating outcomes and perceptions from the shadows, and that this encounter was only a glimpse into the depth of her capability, leaving him on the edge of understanding, fascinated, unsettled, and eager to see what the next moment would reveal about Sophia Lane. Sophia Lane returned from the front entrance, her steps measured, eyes scanning the room with unwavering focus, noting the subtle shifts in guest attention, the alignment of table settings, and the rhythm of staff movements, her presence commanding yet entirely understated. Alexander Reed observed from his seat, leaning slightly forward, the tension in his shoulders easing as he allowed himself to be drawn into her quiet authority, the disbelief in his expression mingling with admiration and an emerging curiosity. A server hesitated with a complicated order for a family with specific dietary needs, and Sophia approached, her green eyes meeting theirs briefly, a small nod of acknowledgement and a whispered instruction guiding them with ease and clarity, instantly restoring the flow without drawing attention to herself. Alexander watched, astonishment deepening, as she balanced a tray with multiple plates, navigating the room with precision, her gestures economical but full of intention, her awareness of timing and placement creating a seamless experience for the diners. Guests murmured appreciatively at her attentiveness, unaware that every movement, every decision, and every subtle adjustment was being orchestrated to maintain harmony, efficiency, and satisfaction, and Alexander realized he had underestimated not only her skill, but her understanding of human perception and environment management. Sophia paused near a child at a corner table, crouching to adjust a chair with a gentle smile, her attention momentarily softening without breaking the rhythm of her work, and Alexander noted the balance of empathy and control in her actions, a combination rarely seen, particularly from someone in a service role. She returned to the main aisle, adjusting silverware and plates for another table, ensuring symmetry, and timing the delivery of dishes with precision, each small correction reinforcing the invisible command she held over the dining room. And Alexander's pulse quickened as he recognized the mastery in her subtle leadership, the quiet power she wielded effortlessly. A whispered question from a guest about wine selection drew her attention, and Sophia offered guidance with calm authority, explaining choices with confidence and accuracy, while Alexander's gaze followed, noting how her knowledge extended beyond etiquette and service into areas that suggested training, intelligence, and situational awareness that far exceeded expectations. She moved to assist a server carrying a tray, a simple gesture redirecting the path to avoid collision and timing adjustments, unnoticed by most, yet observed by Alexander with growing realization of the depth of her influence. Sophia's eyes flicked toward him for a moment, serene and deliberate, acknowledging his attention without invitation, her composure unwavering, and she returned to her path, the staff unconsciously aligning with her timing, the restaurant rhythm orchestrated in perfect synchrony under her quiet guidance. Alexander shifted in his seat, awareness dawning that the woman he had assumed to be ordinary was, in fact, shaping the environment, influencing outcomes, and commanding attention without raising her voice or seeking recognition, a subtle authority that left him both fascinated and humbled. As Sophia delivered a final dish to a table near the window, adjusting glasses and napkins with meticulous care, Alexander realized that every element of the dining experience, from timing to perception, had been influenced by her awareness and competence, and the depth of her capability became more apparent with each measured movement. He exhaled slowly, the weight of understanding pressing lightly against him, a mixture of intrigue and reluctant respect, as he recognized that Sophia Lane's quiet mastery had redefined his understanding of influence, control, and professionalism, leaving him on the edge of anticipation for what the next interaction would reveal about the extent of her skill, poise, and the unseen power she carried within the simple guise of a waitress. Sophia Lane approached the final section of the dining room, her movements steady, deliberate, as if the space itself bent to the rhythm she set, each step measured, each glance purposeful, every adjustment to the tables, glasses, and utensils carrying weight far beyond what anyone could perceive. Alexander Reed remained seated, leaning slightly forward, his hands resting lightly on the polished wood, eyes tracing her movements, the disbelief from earlier replaced with a complex mixture of respect, intrigue, and cautious admiration. A new guest approached hesitantly, asking about a special request for an allergy-sensitive meal, and Sophia intercepted with quiet authority, confirming details and coordinating the kitchen with a few swift taps on her tablet, subtle gestures guiding the staff, without a word, each command invisible to those who were not paying attention. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly as he watched her orchestrate the flow of the room, noting how she anticipated needs before they arose, corrected potential mistakes before they occurred, and maintained a seamless harmony across every table, every order, every interaction. The staff moved more confidently under her subtle guidance, responding to her cues almost instinctively, while guests remained oblivious to the invisible hand that controlled the rhythm and quality of their experience, and Alexander felt the slow, unmistakable realization that he had underestimated the full scope of her abilities. Sophia paused briefly near a table of business clients, adjusting silverware with a careful hand and subtly redirecting the placement of dishes to enhance presentation, all without interrupting conversation, all with a grace that suggested practice, awareness, and a profound understanding of perception and influence. Alexander exhaled slowly, his mind racing as he acknowledged that the woman before him, whom he had assumed to be ordinary, had been quietly directing the environment, influencing outcomes, and commanding respect through competence, poise, and subtle authority alone. A child at a nearby table dropped a napkin, and Sophia, without breaking stride, bent slightly, retrieved it, and returned it in perfect order, her action seamless, leaving Alexander silently noting the combination of empathy, awareness, and control that allowed her to shape the experience without anyone realizing the full extent of her influence. She moved past his table once more, balancing a tray with several drinks, her steps smooth, precise, and controlled, her eyes briefly meeting his with a faint, enigmatic smile, a look that conveyed both acknowledgement and quiet mastery, leaving him unsettled yet fascinated by the depth of skill and understanding he could not yet fully grasp. The dining room continued around them, guests chatting, servers moving with subtle guidance, and every small adjustment Sophia made resonated through the space, creating order, efficiency, and harmony without a hint of effort. And Alexander felt the quiet, undeniable weight of her presence, the realization settling that the person he had underestimated had been shaping perceptions, controlling outcomes, and quietly wielding authority throughout the evening. Sophia returned to the central station, her eyes scanning every section, every table, every staff member, ensuring that the rhythm remained uninterrupted, the service flawless, and the experience seamless. And Alexander observed, captivated, understanding that this encounter had shifted his perspective, that quiet competence and understated control often carried more power than wealth, status, or force. As she adjusted a final chair and arranged the last place setting, Alexander's gaze followed, the slow recognition settling that the woman he had dismissed had quietly orchestrated the evening's flow, mastered every interaction, and held influence that surpassed his own assumptions, leaving him both humbled and profoundly aware that the story of Sophia Lane, her skill, her poise, and her subtle authority, was only beginning to reveal its full impact, a narrative unfolding with silent power that he could neither contest nor ignore. Sophia Lane moved with deliberate grace toward the far corner of the restaurant, her green eyes scanning each table, each guest, and every subtle motion of the staff, assessing needs before they were even expressed and guiding outcomes. With an invisible hand, Alexander Reed remained seated, his posture shifting subtly as he tried to reconcile the quiet authority radiating from her with the assumptions he had carried about her, his disbelief slowly giving way to a mixture of fascination and reluctant admiration. A new couple at a table seemed uncertain about a complicated request, and Sophia approached, her gestures precise and economical, her soft voice giving instructions that were both clear and gentle, instantly calming the situation and orchestrating the flow so the dishes arrived perfectly timed and correctly prepared, leaving the guests impressed without realizing the full extent of her guidance. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his eyes tracking every motion, every nod, every subtle cue, as she adjusted the placement of a glass, repositioned a chair, and rearranged a small side plate, all with an efficiency and awareness that left him quietly astonished. She paused to check an order on her tablet, her fingers gliding effortlessly across the screen, sending commands to the kitchen and coordinating with the staff in a way that was seamless, invisible, yet profoundly effective, and Alexander could not take his eyes off her, realizing that the quietest person in the room was commanding control over every outcome without anyone noticing. A server hesitated with a tray carrying multiple desserts, and Sophia intercepted with a small nod and a brief glance, redirecting the path and adjusting timing so the presentation remained flawless. And Alexander noted the subtle precision, the depth of knowledge, and the foresight that had gone unnoticed until now. She then moved toward a table where a child had accidentally tipped over a glass, crouching slightly to correct it with an efficient motion, eyes flicking toward the parents with a polite smile, the act gentle yet deliberate. And Alexander was struck by the combination of empathy, mastery, and quiet authority, the realization settling fully that he had misjudged her entirely. Sophia returned to the main aisle, balancing a tray with several items, her stride measured, movements confident, each placement calculated for efficiency and perception. Her influence rippling through the room in ways Alexander had only begun to understand. Guests continued to chatter politely, servers moved with subtle synchronization, and every small adjustment Sophia made resonated through the environment, shaping experience, perception, and timing in a way that left Alexander in awe of the depth of her command. She paused briefly to observe a table of business clients, subtly adjusting napkins and repositioning glassware to enhance the visual symmetry, and Alexander leaned back, absorbing the full magnitude of her quiet orchestration, understanding that every interaction, every correction, and every anticipatory move reflected a level of skill and awareness far beyond what he had assumed possible. Sophia's gaze flicked toward him, serene, controlled, acknowledging his attention with a tilt of the head. Then she returned to monitoring the room, her presence calming, guiding, and commanding respect without a single raised voice. Alexander exhaled slowly, the quiet intensity of the realization pressing against him, as he recognized that the woman before him, whom he had dismissed as ordinary, had been quietly orchestrating outcomes, shaping perception, and commanding authority with poise, mastery, and subtlety, leaving him on the cusp of understanding that her influence extended far beyond what he had ever expected, and that this encounter was only the beginning of uncovering the full scope of Sophia Lane's quiet, undeniable power. Sophia Lane paused at the edge of the main dining area, her eyes sweeping across the room, taking in the subtle movements of guests, the arrangement of tables, and the flow of servers moving efficiently under her guidance. Alexander Reed watched intently, leaning slightly forward, his fingers tracing the edge of the polished table, the disbelief in his expression slowly giving way to awe as he realized that every element of the restaurant's operation was subtly orchestrated by her, unseen yet undeniable. A server hesitated carrying a tray with multiple orders, and Sophia moved without a word, positioning herself to intercept, adjusting the path with a gentle hand and a soft nod, restoring balance and timing in a way that seemed effortless. Alexander's eyes widened as he noticed the precision, the foresight, and the quiet authority embedded in her actions, a skill that allowed her to anticipate and resolve potential disruptions before they arose. She moved toward a table where a guest had a specific request, her posture calm, her voice soft yet commanding, coordinating with the kitchen and staff seamlessly, each instruction delivered with minimal movement but maximum effect, and Alexander found himself leaning back slightly, astonished at how someone so unassuming could wield such control. Sophia's green eyes flicked toward him briefly, a faint, knowing smile acknowledging his observation without inviting confrontation, and she returned to her path, guiding the flow of the dining room with steps that were measured, deliberate, and rhythmic, influencing the behavior of both staff and guests through presence alone. A subtle adjustment of a chair here, a minor repositioning of silverware there, and she maintained the visual harmony of each table, demonstrating mastery over environment and perception, the influence she exerted undetectable to most, yet palpable to Alexander, who had been observing with growing respect. He noted the balance she maintained between efficiency and empathy, the way she responded to the child who had dropped a utensil with gentle guidance, while simultaneously correcting timing in the kitchen, a combination of skills rarely seen, particularly from someone in her role. Sophia returned to the center aisle, her movements precise as she carried a tray with drinks, her eyes scanning the space to preempt any issues before they could arise, and Alexander's pulse quickened as he realized the extent of her awareness, her ability to manage multiple variables simultaneously while remaining composed, her quiet command permeating the room. Guests continued their conversations, unaware of the orchestration unfolding around them, while staff followed her subtle cues instinctively, the rhythm she established ensuring seamless service, perfect timing, and an experience that appeared effortless. Sophia paused briefly to check a complex order, her fingers gliding across the tablet screen with practiced ease, correcting potential errors and ensuring accuracy, and Alexander could not hide the admiration and astonishment rising in him, recognizing that her unassuming demeanor masked a level of expertise and situational awareness far beyond what he had imagined. She glanced toward him again, the faintest tilt of her head conveying acknowledgement, confidence, and control, and returned to monitoring the room, her influence invisible yet powerful, shaping every interaction, every outcome, and every perception in the dining room. Alexander exhaled slowly, the weight of understanding pressing against him as he realized that the quietest person in the room, the woman he had assumed ordinary, had been directing the flow, orchestrating the experience, and exercising authority with subtlety, poise, and mastery, leaving him both humbled and captivated, aware that this evening was only a glimpse into the depth of Sophia Lane's skill, and that each subsequent moment promised to reveal more about her quiet, undeniable power. Sophia Lane stepped lightly toward the side of the dining room where a group of guests had begun a lively discussion, her green eyes observing the flow of conversation and service simultaneously, noting the placement of utensils, the alignment of glasses, and the subtle adjustments needed to maintain balance and rhythm. Alexander Reed remained seated, watching her every move, the disbelief in his expression tempered by growing admiration, his hands folded on the table as he leaned forward slightly, captivated by the precision and foresight in her actions. A server carrying a tray hesitated at the edge of a narrow aisle, and Sophia approached with quiet authority, guiding them with a soft word and a gentle gesture, ensuring the flow continued without disruption, each action deliberate yet invisible, the room responding to her presence in a subtle, almost imperceptible rhythm that left Alexander increasingly aware of her control. She paused to correct a minor misplacement of silverware at a nearby table, bending slightly to adjust a napkin while simultaneously ensuring that a wine bottle was perfectly positioned, her movements smooth and confident, blending grace with efficiency, and Alexander noted the depth of awareness she possessed, the capacity to manage multiple elements simultaneously without effort. Guests continued to talk. Servers moved in synchrony with her subtle cues, and each adjustment Sophia made created a seamless experience, the invisible orchestration of her actions commanding the environment without a word, leaving Alexander increasingly unsettled, yet fascinated by the quiet authority she projected. She glanced briefly at him, a polite tilt of the head acknowledging his attention, before returning to coordinate a complex order from the kitchen, her fingers flying across the tablet, confirming timing, routing plates, and adjusting sequences with precision that he had never witnessed before in a service role. Alexander exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, absorbing the scope of her influence, the realization pressing on him that the woman he had assumed ordinary had been quietly managing perception, timing, and outcomes with unmatched competence, poise, and discretion. Sophia moved to the central aisle again, balancing a tray laden with drinks and desserts, her eyes constantly scanning the room, anticipating needs, correcting potential errors, and coordinating the staff. Each gesture economical yet intentional, each step reinforcing the rhythm and flow of the dining experience. A child dropped a fork near a table, and Sophia retrieved it with a swift, gentle motion, returning it perfectly, the interaction executed without drawing attention, demonstrating empathy alongside authority, a combination that left Alexander silently marveling at her skill. She continued past his table, adjusting placements and timing, each action reinforcing the subtle mastery she exercised, and Alexander felt the weight of understanding pressing in, that the quietest person in the room often held the most power, that influence could be commanded without fanfare, and that assumptions based on position, uniform, or demeanor could be profoundly misleading. Sophia returned to the back station, scanning each section, adjusting placements, offering brief nods and soft words to guide staff, ensuring the seamless delivery of service, and Alexander realized that the evening, the environment, and the perception of every guest had been orchestrated under her guidance, that every outcome had been quietly directed, and that he had been witnessing a level of skill, control, and subtle authority far beyond what he had anticipated, leaving him captivated, reflective, and aware that the story of Sophia Lane was only beginning to reveal its full, remarkable depth. Sophia Lane paused briefly near the center aisle, her hands resting lightly on the edge of a tray as she scanned the room, taking in the flow of service, the placement of tables, and the subtle movements of both staff and guests, her green eyes alert yet calm, every detail noted and recorded in her mind with precision. Alexander Reed remained seated, leaning slightly forward, the tension in his shoulders easing as he continued to watch her, fascinated by the quiet authority that radiated from her, the disbelief from earlier now tempered by a deepening respect and a reluctant admiration. A server carrying a complicated order hesitated near a corner table, and Sophia stepped forward with a fluid motion, adjusting the path of the tray with a gentle hand and a soft nod, guiding the staff member without raising her voice, her influence subtle yet undeniable, and Alexander's eyes widened as he recognized the depth of skill required to manage such precision effortlessly. She moved to a table where a guest had a special dietary request, crouching slightly to adjust a chair while simultaneously coordinating with the kitchen via a tablet, her movements efficient, deliberate, and precise, ensuring that the order was fulfilled flawlessly without drawing attention to the complexity of her orchestration. Alexander leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, his mind racing as he realized that every element of the dining experience, from the timing of orders to the perception of guests, had been subtly guided by her hand, her quiet presence commanding the rhythm, the flow, and the outcomes in ways he had never anticipated. Sophia glanced briefly at him, a faint, measured smile acknowledging his observation without inviting conversation, and she returned to her path, adjusting a wine glass here, repositioning a plate there, each motion reinforcing the harmony of the environment, the control she exercised imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention. Guests chatted, servers moved with fluid synchronization, and the room hummed with an invisible order, each action in subtle alignment with Sophia's direction, and Alexander felt the weight of understanding pressing upon him, recognizing that the person he had underestimated was quietly orchestrating the experience, influencing perceptions, and commanding authority through competence, poise, and deliberate action. She paused to check the progress of a multi-table order, her fingers gliding across the tablet with ease, rerouting plates, and confirming timing with minimal motion, and Alexander noted the combination of foresight, technical skill, and situational awareness that allowed her to manage multiple variables simultaneously while remaining composed, the quiet mastery of her craft unfolding with every gesture. A child dropped a utensil, and Sophia bent to correct it seamlessly, returning it with a soft smile, her attention and empathy as precise as her coordination of the dining room, demonstrating a balance between human connection and professional control that left Alexander silently observing, deeply aware of her capabilities. Sophia moved again through the center aisle, balancing a tray laden with drinks and desserts, eyes scanning the space, anticipating needs, and adjusting positions and timing with exacting care, each movement reinforcing the authority she wielded without assertion, leaving Alexander captivated by the elegance and efficiency of her influence. She glanced toward him briefly, the faint tilt of her head conveying both acknowledgement and subtle command, before returning to ensure the smooth progression of service, her control invisible yet absolute, shaping every interaction, every outcome, and every perception in the room. Alexander exhaled slowly, the realization settling fully that the woman he had assumed ordinary had been quietly directing the rhythm, the energy, and the perceptions of the entire dining room, her skill, awareness, and composure demonstrating a level of authority and mastery that left him humbled, intrigued, and aware that the story of Sophia Lane, her quiet power, and the depth of her influence was only beginning to unfold, promising further revelation with every subsequent movement and decision she executed. Sophia Lane moved to the far corner of the dining room, her posture calm and measured, eyes sweeping across every table, every staff member, and every subtle movement in the room, absorbing details that would go unnoticed by anyone less attentive. Alexander Reed remained seated, leaning forward, elbows resting lightly on the polished wood, his eyes fixed on her, a mixture of disbelief and growing admiration etched across his face. A waiter carrying a tray hesitated, and Sophia intercepted with a fluid motion, guiding them with a small nod and a gentle hand, redirecting the path without a word, the action subtle yet decisive, leaving Alexander momentarily speechless at the control she exercised so effortlessly. She crouched slightly at a table where a young child had spilled a glass, correcting it with a smooth, precise motion, her green eyes flicking briefly toward the parents with a polite smile that reassured without drawing attention, demonstrating empathy alongside authority. Alexander leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly as he realized that every interaction, every adjustment, and every subtle decision in the room had been filtered through her awareness and judgment, shaping perception, timing, and flow with a quiet mastery he had never anticipated. Sophia moved back toward the center aisle, balancing a tray of drinks and desserts, her movements economical yet full of intention, scanning the room continuously to anticipate needs, prevent errors, and maintain harmony, the staff responding to her cues almost instinctively, their rhythm aligned with her silent guidance. Guests continued their conversations, unaware of the invisible orchestration, while Alexander's attention remained riveted, noting how she adjusted a napkin here, repositioned a glass there, subtly correcting a timing issue in the kitchen, with a swipe on her tablet, and managed to coordinate multiple elements simultaneously with fluid precision. She paused at the edge of a table of business clients, checking the placement of utensils and glasses, correcting small errors, and communicating with the kitchen staff through subtle gestures, all without interrupting conversation or drawing attention, leaving Alexander increasingly aware of the depth of her expertise and the quiet authority she held. His pulse quickened as he considered the paradox of her presence, the way someone so unassuming could command respect and influence outcomes without asserting dominance, without speaking above a soft whisper, and without seeking recognition. Sophia's gaze briefly met his, the faintest tilt of her head acknowledging his observation, a gesture measured and deliberate, conveying confidence, poise, and control, before she moved toward another table to monitor and order, her steps light, deliberate, and purposeful, maintaining the rhythm and flow of the room. Alexander exhaled again, the weight of understanding pressing gently against him, recognizing that the woman he had dismissed as ordinary had been quietly directing the evening, orchestrating service, managing perception, and subtly influencing outcomes with an efficiency and skill that left him both humbled and intrigued. Sophia adjusted a chair for an elderly guest, checked the alignment of plates and glasses on multiple tables, coordinated timing with the kitchen, and ensured that every server moved in sync with her rhythm, the room functioning seamlessly under her silent guidance, and Alexander's mind raced to process the full scope of her influence. She moved toward the dessert station, eyes scanning the room continuously, hands precise in placement and adjustments, offering small nods to servers and brief, quiet words of instruction that guided action without drawing attention, the effect on the environment subtle but profound, leaving Alexander aware that he had underestimated her entirely. Sophia's movements, her awareness, her control, and her poise all combined to create an invisible order, a seamless flow, and an environment where efficiency, perception, and service were elevated to an art form, and Alexander realized with quiet astonishment that the story of Sophia Lane, her mastery, and her quiet, undeniable authority had only begun to reveal its depth, leaving him captivated, reflective, and fully aware that each subsequent moment would further unveil the remarkable scope of her influence and the power she held without ever needing to raise her voice or seek attention. Sophia Lane stood at the center of the dining room, her hands folded lightly in front of her, eyes scanning the final tables, the soft hum of conversation wrapping the space in warmth, and a quiet sense of completion settling over her. Alexander Reed rose slowly from his seat, a subtle shift in his posture signaling the recognition of what had truly unfolded. Every detail, every motion, every interaction had been guided by her calm, precise authority, and he felt a rare sensation of humility mixed with admiration. He stepped closer, but kept his distance, allowing her space, and watched as Sophia moved to collect the final orders, her movements unhurried yet deliberate, each gesture conveying competence, empathy, and grace. The staff followed her cues instinctively, the rhythm she had set for the evening bringing harmony and efficiency without a single raised voice, and the guests, unaware of the orchestration, smiled and chatted, enjoying the seamless experience she had crafted. Alexander finally spoke, his voice measured, carrying the weight of respect he had not expressed before. "I had no idea you were capable of this level of control, of awareness." Sophia paused, her green eyes meeting his, calm and steady, a soft smile playing across her lips, and she nodded once, acknowledging his words without needing to elaborate, her quiet dignity filling the space more than any declaration could. He looked around the dining room, seeing the subtle perfection in table arrangements, the fluid coordination of staff, and the satisfaction in the guests' expressions, and he realized that her influence had transformed the evening into something extraordinary, an experience elevated by skill, poise, and quiet authority rather than wealth or status. A small laugh from a child at a nearby table drew Sophia's gaze, and she responded with a gentle nod, crouching slightly to adjust the child's chair, her actions precise and compassionate, a reminder that true leadership often blended mastery with empathy. Alexander felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a recognition that humility and respect were as powerful as any title, and that the lessons of patience, observation, and quiet competence were sometimes the most profound. Sophia moved back toward the central station, aligning trays and adjusting a few final items, her eyes reflecting a calm satisfaction, and Alexander realized that the evening had changed him, teaching him to observe more, judge less, and honor skill and integrity wherever it appeared. The last guests finished their meals, leaving tips and smiles, the staff exchanging quiet glances of gratitude and accomplishment, and Sophia acknowledged them all with a nod, her aura of composed authority leaving an imprint on everyone in the room. Alexander approached her one last time, pausing a few steps away, and said quietly, "You have taught me something tonight that I will not forget. Thank you." Sophia inclined her head gently, her smile soft, and replied, "Excellence does not need to shout. It needs only to be." The two shared a silent understanding, a connection forged through observation, respect, and recognition of ability. And in that moment, the weight of the evening lifted, leaving a serene sense of closure, a quiet justice that felt earned and deeply satisfying. As Sophia began to tidy the remaining items with graceful efficiency, Alexander stepped back to watch, the bustle of the restaurant continuing around them, yet the stillness between their shared acknowledgement lingered, a powerful testament to dignity, competence, and the transformative impact of quiet leadership. And as the night drew to a close, the warm lights of the dining room casting gentle reflections across polished surfaces, the sense of completion, of justice quietly restored, and of lessons learned without words settled over both of them, leaving a memory of elegance, respect, and calm authority that would echo far beyond the walls of the restaurant, and perhaps linger in the hearts of those who witnessed it. If this story moved you, take a moment to share your thoughts below, leave a comment about what resonated most, and subscribe to follow along as more moments of quiet strength and human dignity unfold before your eyes.